Um, I tell young lawyers and summer associates that one of the high points of and goals for their experience here should be to come to know the remarkable qualities, not just lawyerly, of their peers. And as I was thinking about introducing Martine this afternoon, I realized that as a young associate, she was a preeminent example of this point. As you saw from the brief write-up that we circulated prior to today's lunch, Martine is the chair and CEO of United Therapeutics, a global biotechnology company based in Silver Spring with about 10 offices here and abroad, with fabulous architecture and fabulous staff, which has discovered and developed all sorts of medical breakthroughs, the first one being to save Martine's daughter from a rare, at that time, fatal illness less than 20 years ago. Even prior to that, Martine was a pioneer, a true pioneer, in the then cutting-edge field of satellite technology, where she started, among others, PanAmSat, the first privately owned satellite competitor to the internationally owned satellite monopoly, Intelsat, and Sirius, that's SIRIUS, the satellite to automobile technology and service that continues to grow today. Her technological and academic prowess has been matched by her groundbreaking but also idealistic business accomplishments. She has also thought deeply and written about religion, philosophy, bioethics, and transgenderism. She cares deeply about people and human values. She was an associate here in 1981 in our communications practice. We knew then that she was a special person with a powerful intellect and passionate interests. So I made considerable effort to match her assignments to her profile. She did great work, often going beyond the scope of the initial assignment to the benefit of all. I was naturally disappointed, therefore, when she came to me after a year to say she was leaving to pursue her consuming interest in astronomy at the University of Maryland. She asked if she could stay on for 4 or 5 months until the program started. I said, of course, but the menu of assignments will probably be less tailored to your interests in the future. So over the next period, we threw all kinds of projects her way as the needs of our practice dictated, though I was concerned that she would find them boring, tedious, or mundane because I knew how driven she was with respect to her interest in satellite and astronomy. However, and you may not remember this, Martine, when it came time for her to depart, she told me that if she had had a similar list of projects in the first year as she'd been assigned to in the last 4 months, she might not have gone off to Maryland. And I learned something from that. I think it is that learning the legal craft is interesting in itself and important and valuable, notwithstanding what the subject matter is. But in recalling that episode recently, I wondered how much the world would have lost if she had stayed. Not really, however, because Martine follows her star wherever it leads her, and sooner or later I feel certain, positive, that she would have found her path and excelled. A second necessary ingredient for a great law firm, in addition to outstanding young lawyers, is great clients. Martine was also a great client, and I'm not sure how many speakers we've had who've been both associates and clients. I mean, some lawyers would think that's the ultimate revenge. She was tough-minded as a client, creative, tenacious, and saw the big picture. We navigated some rugged circumstances together. She always came through for us, and of course, we tried to do the same for her. So from former first-year associate to client Martine, it gives me such pleasure to welcome you today.
Thank you very much, Jon. It's just an immense pleasure for me as a former Covington associate When Jon was the partner responsible for me and for our entire communications group to introduce me and to see you today, Jon, 30 years later, these are the super happy moments that life is made up of. I will start off by saying probably the reason I was both an associate and a client, and am still a client, is because I am a unadulterated, dyed-in-the-wool fan of Covington and Burling. I have always respected this firm. It's the reason I chose this firm over other offers as a client, as a associate. I actually was not a summer associate here. I was a summer associate at Cravath, and I chose this firm because of the values that I saw represented in the individuals that I had met, as well as especially in the pro bono activities that I had seen Covington undertake all the way back to the early 1980s, being on the side of organizations such as Trans-Africa that were working for equality and peaceful change in South Africa. Up through the years of all the many Covington associates and partners that went on into industry and government and accomplished so many fantastic things. So when I'm in my own company, whether it was a satellite communications company or currently our biotechnology company, and I find a need for best-in-class legal services, I advise the attorneys, in-house attorneys working for us to most strongly and first consider Covington and Burling. So you guys are at, in my opinion, the best law firm in the entire world. So for me to be invited back here to speak, you know, I'm just like walking on 6 inches of air right now. Now, I would like to just perhaps give a few comments about my background and then open up the rest of the time to questions on any subject that I'll touch upon in these first few remarks, so people will understand that any question of any field is free for questions. And I'm most interested about addressing things which are of interest to you. I was extremely fortunate in having the opportunity to work for Paul Berman as the partner directly responsible for most of my work assignments, who's still here today, and it has been 30 years since I saw Paul. Paul was a fantastic partner, and he delegated, you know, vast tracts of work for the clients to me. He might say it's because he didn't understand what the work was about, and he trusted that I did. Some of it I did, some of it I didn't, but I love to learn. Most of all, I love to learn. And what I didn't know, I learned, and I had the resources for most of that learning here at Covington with its state-of-the-art electronic technologies of the time, as well as its very well resourced double-story library over at 12th and Penn. What I did not know, and I needed to go elsewhere to learn, I brought to Jon and Paul brochures for conferences on satellite communications, radio frequency spectrum matters, that were held in all different parts of the United States and sometimes in Europe. And I was really very much impressed with the fact that they always authorized me to attend these conferences as learning activities. I learned what I did not know or couldn't learn here. I learned by going to these places where experts congregated and buttonholing them in the corridors, trying to learn what I could, and if the circumstances were right, maybe even trying to nudge them our way as a client. So, Jon, you're in Paul's example of delegation of not only responsibility, but the authority necessary to succeed with that responsibility is something that has carried through with me to this very day. And I would go into big meetings at the Federal Communications Commission and the Department of Commerce, and I could stand up and say, I'm representing the broadcasting industry because Paul and Jon had given me the authority to do that, to go along with the responsibility our clients had charged us with. So it was a great period of time, and as Jon said, my quest for learning began to go outside the boundaries even of the law. I became, this was the day and age to just kind of reset everybody's time portal here. This was the day and age of the space shuttle first taking off. And now, you know, the year that I started at Covington was the year of the space shuttle's very first flight. And there was huge excitement and anticipation about the kind of space stations that the space shuttle could build, and that there would be hundreds of perhaps thousands of people living and working in space. So I applied to University of Maryland's graduate school. I had taken a lot of science and engineering courses as an undergrad. They accepted me into their graduate school to study astrophysics, and I thought I would get a PhD in astrophysics to further burnish my credentials for this new age of space technology and development. I was, at this time, I also had 2 children already, was married to the love of my life, and we had another child on the way. While at the University of Maryland, not more than 2 or 3 months went by when requests began to pour in for me to do legal work, even though I had no law firm. And in fact, all I had was an apartment at Marriott Student Housing in Hyattsville. But one request came from NASA. Now, if you are a spacer, a dyed-in-the-wool spacer like me, and NASA asks you to do something, I mean, you kind of stand up and salute. I mean, I was honored. They had a satellite that Congress, in its infinite wisdom, had condominiumized between a government portion and a non-government portion. The government portion was no problem to use, but the non-government portion, the FCC would have to authorize the non-government portion. NASA didn't know how to do that, and somebody rolled them my way, and there I was with NASA as a client. And this happened, several other satellite clients began doing this, and including the University of Maryland. The head of the astronomy department was the chairman of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Radio Frequencies. Now, many of you may appreciate that sometimes radio astronomers do their work with optical telescopes, and sometimes they do their work with radio telescopes. And that's how they find a lot of things which are obscured by clouds in deep space or very far away. So the big honcho of radio astronomy was the chairman of the department at University of Maryland. And he came to me and he said, you know, Martine, all these broadcasters and people like that are interfering with our ability to detect rare molecule signals in distant nebula. I wonder if you could use your communications law expertise to get the FCC to create some kind of peace treaties between the active broadcasters and us scientific research interests. So as you can imagine, very soon the work in communications law was crowding out all of my time to get a PhD in astronomy or astrophysics. And soon thereafter, I hung up a shingle on K Street over at 22nd and K, and retired from my 1.5 years of PhD work on astronomy and became a full-time solo practitioner satellite communications lawyer. The firm became successful, and one of my favorite clients eventually developed an illness and asked me to take over as the CEO of his satellite communications company. I did that, and at that point, I sort of had completed my transition from being a lawyer looking after other people's interests to being responsible as a principal for my own satellite communications interest. We launched the first satellite tracking system. There are thousands and thousands of trucks throughout the United States whose locations are monitored via this precursor to GPS satellite type of systems. While I was doing this and building up that satellite communications company, I began to have the idea that you could use satellites to transmit radio directly to moving vehicles. Nobody had ever done this before. I saw that I was able to get kind of latitude, longitude digital signals. So I thought maybe if I built a more powerful satellite, I could send down more than latitude and longitude. I could send down streaming classical, jazz, all different types of genres of music. And hence was born Sirius XM, which is today has over 30 million people using it. And I always marvel at the fact that while our medicines at my current company, United Therapeutics, save literally thousands of people's lives, I get more people coming up to me in various public gatherings, thanking me for bringing Howard Stern to their nook and cranny than I do saving people's lives. So such is the power of information and communication. As the 1980s rolled into the 1990s, my two things happened which were sort of big change factors in my life. One, my inner sense that I had always had a transgendered personality, that I felt a female gender, although I was born as a man, had been certainly conditioned as a man and grew up with all of that. Reached a sort of a crescendo point in my early 30s. And I openly discussed this with my loving partner, Bina. By that time, our 4 children, who had been from teenage to early years. And my youngest daughter did the favor of outing me to my parents. And I was one of the real, very, very lucky people who are transgendered in that my wife, I love my wife, she loves me, and she really didn't care exactly what the body or gender configuration was. She said, I love your soul, we'll make everything happen. All 4 of my children, just, smarter than most adults and more culturally attuned and embraced me, each in their own different way, making a simple confluence of dad and she and having no problem at all with like, I love my dad and she loves me. My parents were 100% accepting. And fortunately, by that time, I had made enough money for people through the different satellite communications companies that when I went to my boards of directors and major investors, the typical comment was perhaps best epitomized by one Wall Street guy who said, Martine, you've made money for me in Pan Am Sat, you've made money for me in Sirius XM, I don't care if you come to work in a gorilla outfit as long as you keep making money for me. I've still never come to work in a gorilla outfit, not even on Halloween. So at about the same time, our youngest daughter, named Genesis with a J, was diagnosed with a rare fatal illness, as John mentioned, pulmonary arterial hypertension. And there were no medicines approved by the FDA for that. It's a difficult disease to diagnose. She was just in elementary school. And we ended up at Children's National Medical Center here in Michigan Avenue with the head of pediatric cardiology, Dr. Roger Ruckman. And he told me, I rarely see patients like this. He said, I think she has, maybe 3 to 5 years to live at most. I'm going to refer you and your wife to the transplant group because a transplant is the only possible cure for this condition. But the odds of getting a pediatric transplant are small, and that in and of itself will give rise to a sequelae of rejection of one sort or another. So it was a very, very a grim and sad picture. She spent more and more time in the intensive care ward. Bina and I would tag team, staying there all night while the other was at home with the other 3 kids, taking them to school and whatnot. And when I was there all night after she went to bed, I would go down to the medical library that they had at Children's National Hospital. And as I said, I do have a love of learning. I have a love of libraries, as Tom and I were discussing earlier. And I did it sort of like the old-fashioned way with the Reader's Guide to periodicals and sort of, you know, the medical equivalent of shepherdizing, going from articles to article to article, until I had learned and become as much of an expert on pulmonary arterial hypertension as I could be. Now, I'm not afraid of science, but just to let everybody know, I never even took a biology course in college. So I had to have a basic biology book, a more advanced biology book, an anatomy book, a medical textbook, and then the journal articles, and just keep scanning back and forth and back and forth. But all of you, you know, great attorneys, we all become subject matter experts in whatever area that we have to apply our legal skills to. So all of you are good at that same sort of thing. Ultimately, I found out that there was a molecule that had shown its ability to do something in the lungs that's needed to be done for people with pulmonary hypertension, but it had been tried for another condition. It didn't work for that other condition, and it was locked away in a vault at a big pharmaceutical company, GlaxoWellcome. Long and short of it is I eventually persuaded GlaxoWellcome to sell me that molecule after first trying to get them to develop themselves. They wouldn't, getting anybody else to develop it. I didn't know anything about medicine. I was a satellite communications expert. But I had to do it. Genesis was getting worse and worse and worse. And to make a long story short, they finally agreed to sell it to me. They thought so little of this molecule. They thought they were certain it was useless. They sold it to me for $25,000 and an agreement to pay 10% to them of anything I might ever get from the molecule. Last year, we booked over $1 billion in sales of this molecule. Our company's medicines are used by over 20,000 men and women, mostly women, have this condition. And we have paid Glaxo hundreds of millions of dollars in royalties over those years. So it's certainly the best deal that they probably ever entered into on an out-licensing. Today, our company is continuing to go strong. We just recently, in fact, just 2 months ago, received our first approval from the FDA for another orphan or rare disease. This one is neuroblastoma. It's a horrible pediatric cancer. We developed and had approved by the FDA the first ever medicine they ever approved for neuroblastoma. Just 2 weeks ago, the Europeans also approved it for neuroblastoma. So that moves our company into the direction of orphan oncology, as well as these orphan pulmonary indications. We are now the world's largest cloner of pigs for therapeutic purposes. I did finally get that PhD. You know, I was a little bit frustrated that I couldn't finish it at University of Maryland. Once I started United Therapeutics, I was surrounded by PhDs. Unlike in the satellite communications world, if you have a PhD, you would never ask somebody to call you doctor. It's just not done. In the biotech world, it's like, you know, you could have a PhD in anything, and it's, if you call them Joe, no, it's Dr. Joe. So they're, you know, they're very doctor specific. So I kind of felt it would help my credibility a little bit. I did end up with a PhD in medical ethics, and my dissertation, my thesis, was on the medical ethics of xenotransplantation. At that time, there was a worldwide moratorium on xenotransplantation because it was thought that it was unethical to have it carried out without proof that viruses that are resident in pigs might leap the species barrier and become resident in humans, somewhat like HIV leaped from monkeys into people. So I did my PhD on that. I never really imagined at the early 2000s when I got the PhD that I would end up where I am today with the largest xenotransplantation program anywhere in the world, partners with Craig Venter, the guy who decoded the human genome, who has now applied his floors and floors of the most advanced sequencing machines in the gene sequencing machines in the world to have sequenced the pig genome to a level of resolution far higher than anybody had ever done, identifying specific so-called landing pads in the pig genome where we're able to insert a few genes that could tamp down the human immune reaction to the pig genome, and from which we can delete pig genes that trigger a hyperacute rejection from the human genome. And we are now to a point in time where we can plausibly and I would say with as much realism as when I projected in the early 1980s that we could track vehicles by satellites, and we did that. And by the end of the 1980s, early 90s, when I projected that we could receive satellite music from cars traveling at 70 miles per hour, which we can do that, I would say. And then at the end of the 90s, when I thought that we could take this hopeless medicine, that it's a long story to tell you how hopeless it was, and develop it into something that's producing $1 billion a year in revenues, I would say we are at that same point that I feel within the next 5 to 10 years, we will be able to take patients who are suffering from end-stage lung disease and give them a xenotransplant and return them safely back to health. So that's sort of my story, my arc from Covington to here today, and I'm happy to open it up to any questions on any of those topics. Yes, Paul.
Martine, we are graced with many, many young summer associates on the brink of their careers in law. We are graced with many young summer associates on the brink of their careers in law. What advice would you have for them entering the profession as someone who entered it and then exited it and still is around it? Do you have any words of wisdom from your perspective?
I think my main word of wisdom would be to love the law and to be proud of it. Unfortunately, we live in a social milieu where lawyers are often demonized. And I would say, at least in the corporate world, it's even prevalent. Lawyers are thought of as the people who say no, and therefore they get demonized. But to me, of all the amazing things that go on in the world, and I mean, there are just more miracles every day, everything, you know, from smartphones to precision medicine that can turn an individual's cancers back on themselves. There is absolutely nothing, in my opinion, that is more amazing that humanity has ever done than to figure out how to get 7-8 billion people to live peaceably together the overwhelming majority of the time in the overwhelming majority of places. And here we are pretty much, you know, focused on just the United States, but here you've got 300 million people who cooperatively work together, feel pretty much free of want, free of fear, and feel that they have open opportunities to achieve their life's objectives. Of course, we've got problems. It would be shocking if we didn't have problems. None of us comes out of our mother's womb with any greater degree of quality control than what biology has evolved over millions of years. So there are going to be people who are born with psychiatric problems. There is no quality control process in the early child rearing. There are going to be people who did not have the really great upbringing that I, and I'm sure, you know, the vast majority of the rest of you had. And it is natural when you have so many people who even had everything right with their biology, everything right with their neurochemistry, everything right with their cultural upbringing, that they're going to bump against each other because each one is going to want some of the other person's resources, just the natural things that people have been fighting over from time immemorial. I want that tree with more fruit. I want a whole orchard of the trees. I want a whole valley of the trees. So despite all of these human frailties and reasons for failure, yet we live in a peaceable society of 300 million people here and, you know, about 7-8 billion people worldwide. Well, why is that? What is the single most important factor that supports all of that? I say it's the law. Without the law, that would not be occurring. Without the law, we would have an ISIS-like jungle everywhere we went. So to me, The law is the social DNA of humanity. That's where we embed everything we've learned about how to be peaceable and treat each other with respect, how to allow ourselves to lead more and more self-actualized lives. All these things that we learn and accumulate through experience, we grind into the law. And then that law transcends our own lifetimes and is available to the next lifetime and to the next lifetime. So frankly, I could think of no more noble profession and no profession that anybody should love any less than the law. And if you love the law, if you have a passion for it, if you can be proud to go to a cocktail party or a bar and talk about how cool it is to be a lawyer, you will succeed as a great lawyer. Yes, in the back there.
Well, Martine, thank you very much for incredibly eloquent remarks. I have a couple of questions. First of all, given how amazing your life story has been, I was wondering if I pay you $25,000 and give you 10% of the rights, can I have the movie rights to the story? But seriously, it would make an incredible movie. But my serious question is, from a science and technology standpoint, I talked to a bunch of folks who are lawyers who had scientific backgrounds and who tried to make a go of it and got very frustrated with the opportunities that were available to them. And these are, going to top schools. I mean, my brother-in-law went to, University of Chicago in theoretical physics and ended up in law school, and is now at another firm, doing very well in IP law. But it's frustrating to them, and it's frustrating to me as a citizen. It seems like we don't have a great path, or as good a path as we'd like to have, for people to stay in the sciences and make successful lives there. What can we do as a country to encourage more people to stick with the sciences as a career?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that probably what we need to have is a whole lot of more mentoring and positive role models when people are growing up. One thing that I've done in my company, we're now almost 20 years old, getting close to being 20 years old. So there are people who started there when they were, say, in their 40s and are getting near to retirement age. And I've created a whole floor, which I call the executive mentoring floor. Everybody in the company who's been there 20 years is a millionaire. There's nobody that's been there 20 years that's not a millionaire. So they really don't need, current income. But instead of pushing people out, I ask them, keep your office, keep your phone, keep your card key, keep your parking space, keep your cafeteria privileges and all of that. Just come to the office when you want and mentor the younger people on what you're doing. And I wish that there would be more scientists that, for example, went into elementary schools and talked about the cool things that they were doing and how awesome science was. Carl Sagan used to do things like that, and it was tremendously inspiring. I would say a lot of my love for astronomy was growing up watching people who popularized science, like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Carl Sagan. It's also true in terms of especially having positive role models for women in science. I was so proud this weekend. I was looking at one of the magazines that came across my desk, and so I was sharing with a couple folks at my table here. I'm proud to be a lawyer, always been proud to be a lawyer, so I still a member of a bar, I still get these things. And I saw that of this journal called Super Lawyers, they ranked the top 50 women lawyers in the Washington, D.C. area. Covington had twice as many top women lawyers in the top 50 than any other law firm in the Washington, D.C. area. So, I mean, So more than twice as many. That made me very, very proud. And I think it's important for women to mentor other women, to let them know that they can go into sciences and professions to fulfill their potential, for scientists to mentor lawyers, for lawyers to mentor scientists, and to have this kind of cross-fertilization. One problem with a purely marketplace economy that we have is that everything is sort of left up to marketplace forces. And as a result, a lot of people end up feeling isolated in society. And there's this sociological term called anomie. They just feel kind of like isolated from everybody, not connected to people. And I wish many times that we had more social processes that positively connected people face to face. You cannot replace the impact of face-to-face contact with any amount of social media. Social media is great. It builds on face-to-face relationships, but face-to-face is essential. So that my answer to you would be to create more instances when scientists could mentor attorneys and give them confidence that they can get outside of their legal comfort zone and be successful in a science and technology area. John?
One more question. Martine, you've gotten a lot of credit for the architecture of your building. Could you say something about your interest in architecture? Because it's an aspect of your career you haven't said a word about.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. Well, it's very much like I just got done saying, in fact, I believe that people interacting with each other is the absolute essential ingredient for success. You cannot really succeed as a group of people without any direct contact. So architecture is a way that could either bring people together or can push them apart. I think most people love the architecture of old towns in Provence and places like this where there's a pedestrian architecture that has kind of forced people to be together at the bakery, at the communal table, at the coffee house. And in my own company, I've gone to a lot of great lengths to create spaces where people can meet face to face. I just came back, I came back Friday night. I was at this company in San Diego, Synthetic Genomics, which is a pioneer in the field of creating artificial types of DNA that have never existed before for all types of good therapeutic purposes. And I walked through the labs, as I always like to do, and meet the actual people walking on our projects. And they told me that since they had merged together 3 different laboratories, and people bumped into each other at the coffee machines and at the different lab equipment, that they had noticed a big increase in the number of new ideas and excitement among staff. So I would say that with my architecture, I try to bring people together. It's a very big part of it. The other thing that I try to do, I do feel that we are dumping too much carbon into the atmosphere. And I do feel that if it is possible to live in a good quality of life without increasing the heat of the atmosphere so much, that is a smarter thing to do. So we have built all of our buildings initially in a way that they were LEED certified, as I know that this building is as well, and I compliment Covington on that. But most recently, all of our most recent buildings are what's called net zero architected, where we produce and generate all of not only the electricity, but the heating and cooling energy required on site. We're building a lung restoration facility as a partnership with Mayo Jacksonville that will be our next completely net zero facility. So it's being kind to the earth, drives my architecture, being aesthetic to the community, drives the architecture, but and on the inside, it's trying my hardest to make spaces where people could just bump into each other. Thanks.
You've heard a lot of amazing things today. Just add a little tiny addition to that. 2 minutes before Martine stood up to talk to you, she said, "What should I talk about today?" Martine, it was fabulous. Thank you so much.